But he had been off of the drugs for so long that his body wasn't used to it.
Oh.
And so he immediately just OD'd. Yeah, but like just the idea of like miracles or God being all powerful and he can do anything is not like a wild concept to me. He really wanted to get into World War II really badly, but he was too young, so he faked an ID. Oh yeah, no, going to church with like older people always just, it definitely hits different than like your college Chi Alpha style churches, and or even Venture, just because I don't know how to explain it necessarily, but they're usually they're one of two ways. They're either more laid back or less laid back in a very, it's always polar.
Yeah.
It's always one or the other. And in either case, you're going to get something different and good out of it, in my opinion. Like, I grew up going to Bible study where I was like, my mom took me to the Bible study. So it was a women's Bible study that had like a children's program. And so, but because it was a women's Bible study, my mom was also one of the younger women there. Like, most of the people there were like 60s, late 50s, 60s, 70-year-old women.
Yeah, right.
Including all the leaders. Even the children's leaders were all just in that group. I don't think I ever had a children's leader below 45 at there.
Dang, dude.
And so I went there from when I was 4 to when I was 18, basically. I got to know all of them really well. And that, you get a different perspective when you have a leader who's in an entirely different category than you.
Yeah, that's wild.
Yeah.
Growing up in my youth group experience, I always had youth leaders that were in their just 20s.
Yeah.
20s, I remember it being a big deal when we switched over, like there was a middle school group and a high school group with the church that we went to. When we switched over to the high school group, the leader for that group was in his 30s. That was a big deal.
Yeah.
I remember that particularly.
Yeah. We make fun of we make fun of Luke for being old, and he's what, 23?
Is he 23 or 22?
He might be 22. I don't know.
It was at the facilitator team meeting that we talked about that.
But he's graduated, so yeah.
Yeah, I was just excited to find somebody that was older than me, because I tend to usually be the oldest one in all my friend groups, including Chi Alpha. I tend to be one of the older folks. But then again, I would be a senior right now if I jumped into high school right after, or jumped into college right after high school. So I don't know how many of us there really are left. Most people drop out within those years, I feel like.
I feel like this is the one thing that I love Chi Alpha to death, but this is the one thing I think they could improve on is like kind of relations with returning students, right? Like, I feel like Chi Alpha is very outreach focused and very focused on freshmen, but as soon as they turn into a returning student, you're very much no longer the focus of
you're not like trying to get them to stick necessarily.
Yeah. So I feel like a lot of people will stay their freshman and their sophomore years, but I feel like there were very few, and this could be a function of COVID as well, right? The COVID years
wiped out my generation,
wiped out a lot of the seniors and stuff. But there are a lot of juniors this year, but last 2 years there were like no juniors or seniors hardly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
And so
that makes sense why I was older than everybody, dude.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now this year we have a lot of juniors because it's my class is coming in.
Yeah, you're refilling in that void that COVID left behind, I guess. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah.
I never thought about that.
But yeah, it's
wild.
Yeah, it is wild.
But I brought up that story this morning because I got tricked. I have a little story.
You got tricked?
I got tricked, dude, at the Old Geezer Bible study. What?
Nothing.
What did you just say, Jeremy?
It's not that difficult.
It was very difficult. So basically, the man leading, right? He goes, "All right, I need 2 volunteers." Some silence for a little bit. None of the guys volunteer. You know Paul?
Yeah.
He raises his hand. He's sitting right next to me.
Yep.
And the guy goes, "Oh, good. I was hoping it would be one of, the young gents that came in. It was just 5 of us following Nathan, right?" And so after he said that, I was like, "Oh, well, I'll raise my hand too." So I rose my hand, and he goes, "Perfect. I have my 2 volunteers. Josiah, you need to go out to the hallway." I'm like, "Oh, well, okay." So I left the room. I go into the hallway. And I'm sitting there twiddling my thumbs as I hear a ton of laughter and stuff going on in the room. I'm like, "Dang, I got FOMO. I'm missing out right now." And suddenly Paul opens up the door and calls me back in. I walk into that room. Paul stands like awkwardly next to the door. He doesn't go and sit down. So I'm kind of trying to suss out what's going on by standing next to him and not also sitting down. And the man starts to explain, "All right, Josiah, there's $10 hidden somewhere in this room." And he begins to gesture with his hands. It's going to be about yay tall, so like between my head and my waist, if you will. It's going to be about yay tall, and it's going to be next to something blue. And right next to him, there's a counter with coffee pots that are kind of elevated with blue handles. And as he's talking, he's kind of pointing towards them with his hands, if that makes sense. As he like does the gesture of how tall it is, it's in the direction of the coffee pots. As something blue, he literally looked around like, "Where's something blue next to me?" and pointed to that. So I'm thinking, okay, I did a quick little scan. Nothing else blue going on, right? Or at least nothing that I noticed, apparently. So I run over, so let me back up. So he then says, "You need to go grab these. You guys are going to compete to get it," if that makes sense. So then he says, "Go." And I start walking briskly towards the money, towards where I thought the money was going to be. And I noticed that Paul is not with me. Where is Paul? Because we're supposed to be racing right now. I turn around and Paul is walking backwards, looking at me the other way with a smile on his face, just kind of like really awkwardly, as if he's like, he knows something. So I begin to get into my own head questioning, like, this is not right. I'm not going to find money over here, dude. I go look around the coffee pots, no money. And as I'm doing that, Paul, there's like a tissue box on some windowsill or something like that where he finds the money. But so I sit back down, and then the guy goes in to explain how Paul knew where the money was. He actually knew.
Yeah.
So it's like, then it goes into the lesson of like, so trust. And I don't remember how that really tied in, but it definitely did. And it was really cool in the moment. So I thought that was just kind of like a little fun story where I got a little bit embarrassed.
You got tricked.
I got tricked.
Bamboozled.
Yeah, absolutely flabbergasted. It's really fun to be the
one
fun.
tricking, not the one being tricked.
I don't know. It's like it's not every day that you get in an opportunity where you're like, you're not in the know of what's going on. It was kind of fun.
Yeah. Dude, I never know what's going on. But yeah, sounds like a classic Bible study move. I don't know. My Bible study growing up, the one I was mentioning earlier.
Yeah.
It was very, how do I put it? Like, they were very intense.
Oh.
Even at the children's level. They assigned homework.
Whoa.
That you would go back and you would read the Bible and you would answer questions. And then the following week, you would come back and you would basically, in front of the group, we would go through and explain our answers to each question.
That sounds awful.
And,
maybe I'm wrong?
I thought it's actually like a really good way of like keeping people kind of accountable for actually doing the reading. And making people think about what the passage says before they come in, right?
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of the times when you have something like a small group Bible study and everyone just reads the Bible and it's just there, and then you have 30 seconds to think of an answer while there's awkward silence before somebody has to give an explanation of the passage.
Yeah.
Right? That doesn't really give time for the passage to, like, breathe, if that makes sense, to like really soak in what it means. And so a lot of the time you only get very superficial answers on the passage.
Yeah, I guess you would learn a lot A lot better.
Yeah, so that was kind of the purpose of it.
Cool.
And I personally really liked that. What was sad though was as I was progressing through, because I mentioned I started when I was like 4,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I progressed all the way through until they kicked me out, because it's a women's Bible study and I turned 18. So they're like, no.
That's crazy.
I also went to college.
Marcus is a player, confirmed, dude.
But I also went to college. Actually, they didn't have to because I went to college when I was 17. But what was I gonna say? As I was progressing through, they were starting to dumb down the homework at the same time that I was progressing, right?
Oh.
So because the organization's called BSF, and they used to have a reputation as like the hardcore Bible study, right? So when we read through Isaiah, right, the study on Isaiah, we would go through 2 or 3 chapters in a week and actually
that's a
break
lot.
them down.
That's
And
a-
we'd
that's a
spend
lot.
like a full hour and a half just going through, and you would spend 2 or 3 hours on the homework beforehand, just going through the passage and answering all the questions and like prepping for the discussion kind of. So it always had the reputation as like the hardcore Bible study. But as I was getting older, they used to have like tiers for the different age categories of homework. So obviously if you were tier 1, you're a 6-year-old, most of the questions are check the box type questions. They're not like personal heavy hitter questions. Whereas you get all the way up to the senior, that's like the tier 4 sheet. And they color coded them. So there's the blue, you get the blue sheets once you're 13 or 14.
Nice, yeah.
And those ones have like both the analytical questions and then like more the heavy hitting personal application questions on them as well.
Yeah.
So by the time I got to the senior level, I got 1 year of like the solid old style before I realized the homework started getting shorter and easier and like, how do I put it, like less heavy hitting. Like they were dumbing it down actively while I was there. And the first couple years I was there, they did memory verses, right? Where they'd have the kids memorize a verse. And then they stopped doing it because the reason was it was making the kids who didn't do it feel bad.
Gotcha.
Which
okay.
I can kind of see that, but at the same
Yeah.
time, I always did my memory verse, most of the time anyway. And I did feel bad when I didn't do it, but that was more of like a motivation to do it next week kind of a deal,
That's
right?
what it should be.
And yeah.
I definitely regret my initial reaction. I know why I had that initial reaction. It's because growing up through youth group, I know that I never wanted to be there. So I appreciated the fact that it wasn't too hardcore, that there was a, you know, it was a way more casual. Because mine, how it kind of worked was you'd show up every week, we'd play games and have fun, and then there would be an hour Bible study where like somebody prepared a lesson kind of thing. And we'd all go through it, then we'd discuss, and we'd pray for each other, right?
Yeah.
But it's like going through all of that, I was a very lukewarm Christian. I was very lukewarm in my faith and still really, you know, haven't decided yet that Jesus is my Lord and Savior kind of thing. Even if I said I did at the time, you know, he really wasn't in my heart, if that makes sense. So going there, it was kind of more out of obligation to go rather than out of my own desire to learn about the Bible. So something like hardcore like that would be great. I was thinking of it like if I wanted to put, like, let's say I have kids, you know, putting them through that sounds beneficial, but it really depends on their own faith and their own desire to learn.
No. One thing I'll say is there is a danger to that kind of hardcore Bible. It's not all good. And the real danger is kind of what happened to me is that your faith can become very intellectualized, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And that is something that I very much had to struggle through coming here at university and through Chi Alpha. Was basically my faith was not a relationship with God. It was an intellectual understanding of God, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
I studied God and the Bible the same way I would study a chemistry textbook.
Yeah, right.
With a very intellectual lens, right? You know the story, you know why the story, you know the players, the characters, the motivations, like the different sins and attributes of like the Holy Spirit and stuff are kind of like I don't know, like a D&D reference, or like your player stats almost.
Sure.
Like it's an intellectual idea, not like a real thing. And that was something that took me a while to get out of, because I really like intellectualizing things and don't really like the more emotional aspect of it. So to me, if I can get if I can break it down into a formula, y equals mx plus b, a linear thing that can just be followed and understood and measured,
Yeah.
then it's great. That's what I love doing that. And that kind of hardcore Q&A style thing where you go through a passage and then you go through the questions and then you go back through the passage and you look for the answers to each question can lend itself to that idea of scripture, right? Where it's very intellectual and you've memorized the passages, you know the scripture, you know the answer to all the questions, but you really don't ever develop a relationship with God.
Yeah.
And that was and it's no fault of the teachers. I loved my teachers in that Bible study. They were great. I wish I was too young to like know how to like keep in contact with them, but I wish I could, because they've got to be some of them got to be in their 70s by now. But those ladies were, because we would have the discussion period and then there would be a Bible lesson. And then this is like a 2.5 hour Bible study in the evening. And there was no meal. There was no games beforehand. You dove straight in from the start. And then they would have like 5-minute breaks, but it was mostly like you would dive into discussion and then you would have the Bible lesson. And then you would have, for the younger kids, they had what they called homiletics, which was basically, there was like 4 stages where you'd take a passage and then you'd go verse by verse and shrink each verse down, and then you'd shrink the passage down. And the whole idea was to condense the passage into like one sentence of like one sentence that said what
That's really cool.
the passage meant.
So you get the meaning, the kind of the summary of it, you're saying?
Yeah. Now, what we did, which I'm not sure was that good, but I was also like 12, was me and a couple of the other kids there, specifically this one other girl who was there, would always compete for who could shrink the passage the shortest and still have it make sense.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of our game that we would play.
That'd be fun, though.
Doing that. And
Might
then,
as well, like, make it fun, right? That doesn't like take the value out of it, does it?
It sort of can once you make it preposterously short. Like we would do sometimes. So 5 or 6 words. I mean, you're not getting the concept of the passage from 5 or 6 words.
At least the context of it.
Yeah. And then at the end, they would do what they called basic truth, which was like just like a quote unquote tough question that you would then have to like, they'd have a bunch of verses and then you'd read the verses and try and answer the question based off the verses. And so, yeah, it was definitely more intense than anything we do at our life groups. And I kind of miss that a little bit, right? This is one of the things with being a facilitator is I really wish I could bring more of that aspect. And it's not really possible here, which is what I've been learning. But I really do wish I could bring a little bit of that. Maybe not like the intellectualizing part, but more of the rigor in studying the Bible.
Yeah.
Right.
How would you implement the more emotional side of it into that rigorous exercise, if you will?
I think what they did was they kind of tried to scatter the application questions throughout the study, which I think makes them easier to skip or ignore. Like putting your application questions as like just you do the Bible study and then you have the application section where you just go at it for how can what we just learned be applied and how can we turn this into a relationship, like that aspect. And I also think it was not everyone there was like me intellectualizing everything. A lot of people there, I think, had a great relationship with God.
Yeah.
It was more just kind of my personal tendency to do that was exacerbated by the situation. Which not everyone is like that. A lot of people are more, I think a lot of people are into the more emotional side where they don't do the intellectual side of the Bible. And I think that can be very good, but it can make your theology very wishy-washy, which can be dangerous. Over spiritualizing and over emotionalizing the Bible and not having that kind of intellectual background in the scripture.
Yeah. The DE class, they talked about there's like two kinds of people, at least in the American culture, or maybe around the world, I guess, where they kind of compared then the different cultures around the world, where they said some people are more logical and then some people are more mystical, something like that within the Bible. Where most people growing up in America are way more logical, where we don't focus on the mystical parts, if you will, the more spiritual, the more miracle aspect of it, the things that kind of defy nature, if you will.
Yeah, and I don't know, something maybe about just because I was raised in it, but the spiritual aspect seems logical to me. Which doesn't make a ton of sense, but it's kind of just
that makes sense. I
how
think
I see it. Like
it all works together. It doesn't make sense that it wouldn't be logical. It may just be more of a new idea or a foreign understanding at first.
Yeah, but like just the idea of like miracles or God being all powerful and he can do anything is not like a wild concept to me.
Yeah.
But it's just kind of, I recognize that as like more how it is. The more, I think the part where I don't entirely get it is just I really want to say the relationship aspect, because right, you don't have a relationship with chemistry. You study chemistry, right?
Yeah.
You study how the atoms and the molecules build and work together. You study how the math formula, like you study those things. And so you can have like, you can know all the attributes of God. You can know all the passages where God speaks. You can know all of the kind of, I don't want to say the way how God works, but kind of the way how God functions in our current earth, and still not have a full relationship with God.
Yeah.
And so I know, I'm not going to name anyone, but I know people who have relationships with God that are kind of like that, right?
Sure.
So, I don't know where I'm going with this, but yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Right. You reminded, I just remembered basically how implementing that in a life group, like, you know how happy it would be if I could like post what passage we're going to be studying, the life group next week, and post that and have people read it beforehand. Even if they don't like study or fill out questions, and just read it beforehand so they have a general idea of what we're studying.
That's a good idea.
And my problem is I don't think people will actually do it. Right. I really want people to be able to do that. But and it's the other problem of like, if some people do it and some people don't do it, will the people who don't do it be left out of the conversation? And it's a difficult thing to balance.
Yeah.
And
you think, would you ever be wanting to start, and not like outside Chi Alpha necessarily, but, you know, like host an event one of the nights of the week, like a weekly event at your place or somewhere else, wherever it can be hosted, and do a more intense Bible study? I'm sure there's plenty of people in Chi Alpha that would be interested in doing that. You just announce it at a Wednesday night and everybody goes, oh yeah, I'll show up to that.
I feel like I'm too busy almost to do that this semester. Maybe next year, maybe in fall next year or something, my senior year, I can do that. But right now, I am drowning at all times in homework.
Yeah.
And what little time I'm not doing homework, I am actively doing Chi Alpha things, right?
Yeah, for sure. Especially as a facilitator now, I've learned that it is quite the time commitment
for the first time since school started, I actually got to sit down and like play a video game last night.
Yeah,
For
dude,
like 3
yeah.
hours. And I was so happy. I actually got 3 hours to go and play a game.
Dang, guy.
And
Shoot.
this
Sounds
is
fun.
This is literally the first time since in like a week and a half I've gotten to sit down for more than like half an hour and actually play a game. And play a game without feeling guilty that I'm procrastinating on something else.
Yeah, right. Yep.
And
That's
so
always the goal.
I don't know if I have time to organize, set up, figure out like what passage to actually prepare this. I don't have time for all of that.
Yep.
This would be something that like, and even the interns, like the kind of interns are the people who would have time, but they're very much committed to the way Chi Alpha does things.
Yeah.
And so this is definitely something, because I'm not necessarily planning on facilitating my senior year. I feel like facilitator is just something I'm going to do 1 year.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And then I'm going to back off of it after that. Partially because I don't think I can keep this up for very long. Like, just the rate at which I'm expending energy. I don't think I can keep this up for 2 years straight. But also because I think something like what you just mentioned would be something really cool to do.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I've thought about it before.
You could serve in another way then, kind of thing.
Yeah. But I don't know how to make it. Anyway, I can think about this later. I haven't put enough thought into it to say too much more. But
Yeah, that's super cool though, dude. That's
definitely
something I know I would be very interested in.
Yeah, and if I could find somebody, maybe you or someone else, to help me run through that would be something
I would
great
love
to do
that.
next year.
My head knowledge for the Bible, I think I've always been more the emotional type. I brought up the DE class, the logical or the mystical. Like I've always, like in that class, they were all like, so most of us in this room are probably going to be logical, and we like wrote down what we are, and everybody pretty much was, but I was one of the few mystical people. It's like the spiritual, the magical side, if you will, of it all is always compelled to me much more than the logical side. Along with my head knowledge of the Bible, I probably naturally just lean way more emotional with it all. I need to learn, one of my biggest curiosities, or right now, like my desires, is to learn theology. Like I want to understand what I'm reading in the greater story and the characters and the arcs between them all and the reasons why they do the things they do. It's like I don't know those things, at least as deep as I want to. So a study like that would be super valuable to me, in my opinion.
Part of the thing also is you just have to read it, kind of just read the Bible front to back, and it's now, I've always skipped around in the Bible between different passages, but it's definitely something I've always wanted to do, is just sit down, start at Genesis 1 and read all the way to Revelation.
Yeah.
How do I put it? Part of the gaining the head theological knowledge is just reading it to a certain extent, reading it on your own. And
that's where most of mine has come from. Otherwise, it's just like vague remembrances of kind of what you've been learning through sermons and stuff. Like you kind of get familiar with all the constant or the common stories, the themes.
Common stories.
Jesus died for my sins. I know he was nailed to a cross. How did he get there? Don't really know, but he got there. Now it's like now I know because I did read those.
And maybe I've been going to the wrong churches, but almost every church I've ever been to will kind of rehash the same sermon. Like they have the same 10 sermons, even between different churches, that they just kind of change a little bit and then do it again, which is, it's good. Those are all 10 of those concepts are good things that need to be learned. But at some point, right, you're never going to get, and sometimes they will do sermons on tough topics, but you'll never get the broader scope of the Bible from listening to topical sermons, right? Sermons on specific topics will never get you that kind of broader biblical understanding of like the overarching story of the Bible. And because there are individual stories, and then there's kind of the broader overarching themes and stories and principles that the Bible teaches.
Yeah.
And you'll basically never get those from just going to church on Sunday or even from going to Wednesday nights. You'll basically never get those.
Well, yeah, their goal is not to teach you theology, Their goal is just to give you something to chew on and to think about and reflect on yourself in terms of how did Jesus live and how did he show us to live and how are you living and how are you falling short of how you should be living, because we're all human, we're always falling short in some sort of capacity.
And I also think a lot of commentaries are good, but I think sometimes they will read too much into it almost. Right? Like you get a story about someone doing something and then you read this whole thing into the passage. And I've seen people do this before, and I think that's why I don't necessarily recommend, unless you're really stuck on what a passage means, like going to commentaries or going to the Greek and immediately trying to like break it down. I think there's danger in that too. I think a lot of God meant and created the Bible, right?
Yeah.
This is not like a theological, the Bible's not a theological textbook. It's a book that God made. And God made it for us specifically. Now, some people say the Bible's written to us, not for us, but it was written for us.
Yeah.
That's
Maybe
kind of
same thing.
God is powerful enough to write the Bible to us specifically and to the people who came before.
Oh, okay.
So it's a lot of the times, if there is an obvious meaning of a passage, that probably is the meaning of the passage, right? And there may be deeper meanings and stuff laden in there, maybe, but maybe you're reading stuff into it as well.
Yeah.
Right? I think the best way, in my experience, to read the Bible is just to read the Bible and then not really consulting too many outside sources.
Even just praying.
I'm rambling.
And like, Holy Spirit, please help me understand.
I'm
what
rambling.
You want me to learn from
But
it. No, good, dude. Ramble.
Yeah. But anyway.
You got a microphone in front of you. Speak into it. Yeah, it's good stuff.
But yeah. Anyway. I went to Bridge. Have you ever been to Bridge Church?
No.
So what Bridge does, which I found...
Is that in Moscow?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
So I think Jeremy back there has been to Bridge before, right? Has you?
Has me? Yes.
But
for a little bit when I was going through it.
yeah. Their church is very interesting in the way that instead of doing topical sermons, they literally go through the Bible verse by verse.
Whoa. As
like their sermon. And they don't have a pastor. Their elders rotate off giving the sermons.
Oh.
And so they, but when I was there, they were going through, it was Genesis either 19 or 29. It was the one with Abraham in it. And it was right before the destruction of Sodom. And they said, next week, we are going to read verse by verse the destruction of Sodom. And that entire story of Abraham arguing with God, and then God warning Lot, and then Lot freeing Sodom, and then Sodom getting destroyed. And they were wasn't there that next week when they did that, but I heard from a friend who was there, that is exactly what they did. Verse by verse, they went through that entire passage and broke it down.
They broke it down.
Yes.
That's cool, dude. I feel like I would enjoy that.
Yeah.
Like, that's cool.
You're probably not going to get any deep theological applications for your own life out of that. Is my point. Is that the two church strategies, true. One is not necessarily better than the other. They are just different.
Yeah.
One, you're not getting as much verse by verse Bible breakdown knowledge, right? You're going to get through maybe 10 verses in the whole sermon.
Yeah.
But you might get something that's more applicable to your life. Whereas the other method will get you more Bible knowledge, more verse by verse breakdown, more understanding of a particular story.
Yeah.
And it might help lend to your understanding of overarching themes in the Bible or who God is or stuff. But you'll probably get less in the way of real world life applications.
Not having a pastor, though, I'm interested then in the structure of the church. If it makes, like, how does the Bible show the structure of the church? Because as far as I'm concerned, the Bible only regards the church as just the people in general. The church as we know it today, as an organized place, a building that we go to, That's like man-made, I believe.
Paul does reference church structure several different times in saying appointing elders and like making sure the elders are worthy.
Like, is having a pastor biblical?
I cannot say for sure, but I do not specifically recall anywhere in the Bible saying, like, talking about, like, it talks about leaders and, like, elders and leaders. I don't ever specifically remember saying there needs to be, like, one leader.
Yeah.
Or, like, or anything of that kind. I think that's more of a man-made creation.
That's more of like a human. We're so unorganized. We need somebody with a common.
We need one person to kind of
make the common vision. If that makes
one
sense.
person whose job it is to study the Bible and bring it all together. Which I'm not entirely sure that's a biblical approach. I don't think it's bad.
Yeah, sure.
In any way, but I'm not sure if it's like
just because it's not in the Bible doesn't make it anti-biblical necessarily. Yeah,
it's a way of doing it.
Cool. I never even thought about that. I never considered it. Just elders rotating around. It's kind of cool because to me that makes it feel more like it's the community being the church rather than just going to see the big smart man. You know, educate you, then you leave.
And that works if you have a large enough community that has like good elders with good understanding of the Bible
that are willing to sacrifice a lot of their time to putting effort into the community that way. Into the church.
And not every church is going to have that.
So true.
And I know at that particular church, it seemed I met a lot of their elders and a lot of the people, and they all seemed like great God-fearing men who could do it, who had the capability. But then you also have things like time. Do they have to work or other commitments? They have kids. Like there's a lot of problems going into that style.
Yeah.
But if you can do it, I certainly think it's a good thing. It makes topical messages difficult, which makes sense why they do the message the way they do.
Yeah.
But yeah. It's just a different style. So I wanted to bring it up as like, because we were on the topic of like intense biblical, like deep diving into passages.
Well, even like Chi Alpha, they have, shout out to Derek. He's like the head guy, right? The head honcho, the head
Love
pastor.
Derek.
But they all, between the staff team, they're all, I mean, I guess they're all pastors, but they all switch out every single week, you know? They kind of rotate through them for the sermon. So in that way, then it's kind of like they're the elders of our little college ministry.
And another reason they do that is so that the load is not all on one person.
Right, yeah.
Because I see them sometimes when they're prepping for a message, and it's a lot, and they're stressed. And that's one of the other reasons I think people kind of default to just one pastor who that's their job, so that they can.
Because it's a job. For sure.
Yeah, it's a job.
Yeah,
and so that makes the whole elder rotation, if they all have jobs and families, a difficult thing to do. But yeah, Chi Alpha makes it work for Wednesday nights.
Do you have a plan for after college?
No.
Not rad. Most college students I talk to don't. It's really fun to talk about that because it's like I don't know what I'm doing.
I have a general idea, but a lot of my general idea has to do with just kind of where I'm at the end of college, and I don't really know where I'm gonna be. This kind of makes sense.
I mean, there's no reason to worry about it, you know.
Yeah.
The Lord will guide your steps there. He will open those doors.
But I've put significant thought into it, so I will talk about it a little bit. It's not like I don't know, and I've not put thought into it are not the same thing for me. I put a lot of thought into it, and I still don't know.
Okay,
it's kind of where I'm
sure.
Because chemical engineering is an interesting profession in that there are not a lot of chemical engineers in the whole country. There were maybe 40,000 in the entire United States.
Oh, wow.
Which compared to doctors, I don't know the exact number, but I know there were like 200,000 mechanical engineers, and there were like probably closer to like, okay, I would have to Google it to know for sure, but I think there were closer to like 1 million doctors.
So like they're in need then for chemical engineers. Like there's job security in
No.
that? No.
Here's the thing. Chemical engineers are rare because it's A, difficult to do, and B, because there aren't that many applications for them in the United States.
Gotcha.
So it's one of those cases where there are no jobs and no people to fill those jobs either.
Okay, cool.
I call them Schrodinger's jobs. They're both alive and dead. And because it has a lot to do with manufacturing in the United States has been in decline for decades. So with the manufacturing market, the need for engineers has, especially mechanical and chemical, has decreased.
I thought a lot of the tech world was trying to bring back a lot of their manufacturing to the U.S.
Yes, but the tech world focuses a lot on electrical and computer engineers.
Okay, yeah.
Which makes
yeah, okay.
sense. And then the tech world, they need chemies and they need mechanical engineers. Maybe less so mechanical engineers, but they need. But yeah, you're making a circuit board. There's not a lot of mechanical engineering in that. But mechanical engineers have a lot of different things that they do. Mechanical engineers and chemical engineers are both kind of the jack of all trade engineering, especially chemical engineers.
Yeah.
We touch in a lot of different disciplines. So, but basically anywhere in engineering where you have fluid, whether it's a distillery, a refinery, a boiler, or you need to coat something, anywhere you have liquid moving around or performing a chemical reaction, you need chemical engineers.
Cool. Yeah.
So there's a lot of jobs in southern Idaho in like food processing. There's a lot of jobs in mining. There's a lot of jobs in oil.
We need more than 40,000 of them. That's so.
Well, think about it this way: how many chemical engineers does one plant need?
Probably just one, I guess.
Well, maybe 5 or 10. But if you need 5, well, if it's a really big plant, maybe 5 or 10. If it's a small plant, maybe only 2 or 3.
Yeah.
Right. So, if like a single mine might only need 2 or 3 chemical engineers. In the and how, what am I saying? So if you only need 2 or 3 chemical engineers, how many mines are there? And
yeah, in the U.S., how many are there?
Maybe
not
only,
a lot
maybe
anymore,
only.
dude.
I don't know. I'm guessing a couple hundred at most.
Because Idaho is just sparkled with a ton of old ones that have been shut down.
Yeah,
They're not going anymore.
yeah. And so a lot of what they're doing nowadays is food processing. I had a friend who interned at Lamb Weston, and which they make most of the French fries across like the entire country for like fast food chains.
Cool.
So he was just saying they need a lot of chemical engineers just to run boilers and to run like the chemistry behind your preservatives and things to make sure the French fries don't go bad. And the salt content and how much heat, because you want to have enough heat to like preserve and disinfect in like the potatoes, but you also don't want to cook them ahead of time. So you have to like boil, it's a whole science behind food processing, and you need chemies for that. But at the same time, how many do you really need for that, right? You need like a couple people who understand the mechanics, and that's
kind of it.
That's kind of it. Whereas oil needs more because these massive distilleries not distilleries is not the right word, but the refineries is the word I was looking for. With all of these massive like separation columns and all this, they need more chemies for that. Yeah. But even then, there's BP is the main one that recruits at U of I, and they have a massive plant up in Northwest Washington, and even there they probably don't need more than 100 chemies there at that plant. And that plant makes enough jet fuel to fuel both Vancouver and Seattle airports.
What about like the Lewiston paper mill?
They probably need like a dozen.
Oh wow,
that's probably about it.
Have you thought about like where you would want to be if even if you don't end up there or weren't able to make it?
This is the big problem with chemi.
Okay.
Is you have to go to where the job is, not where you want to live.
Yeah, okay.
And so this is the big issue, is ideally I would love to live in like Coeur d'Alene. Mm-hmm. Like that's where I would love to live, but there are no jobs for chemies.
That's where I grew up, bro. That's where I want to go back to.
Oh, are you kidding? I would love to live in Coeur d'Alene.
Oh yeah,
but
dude. It's the best.
Don't
tell people that though. It's actually really trash. Nobody moved there.
Yeah, that is a correct statement. But
gross Coeur d'Alene. Ew. I don't want to move there. Yeah. The lakes are poisonous, and people are mean, and we're also all racist up there.
Oh yeah, of course. Oh, of course.
Yeah,
the
all
lake
the
is full of
piranhas.
piranhas.
Crane rights. What?
You're gonna get a brain. You're gonna get a
crime
brain-eating
rates.
amoeba if you jump in that lake. But anyway, the what was I? The nearest chemi jobs is like West Spokane, or like West Spokane Valley.
That
or
makes
like
sense,
the
yeah.
nearest chemi jobs in the region.
Mm-hmm.
There's Schweitzer, but Schweitzer doesn't really hire.
Does like a big fast food joint, like or chain, need one potentially?
Well, at the plant where they make the food, they
Gotcha.
do. But
Okay.
Where they make the food is crazy.
the
Yeah.
that's true. Well, you think about the ground chicken McNuggets, right? You know how much processing goes into that. There's
Too much, dude.
the amount of chemistry and processing, or like we were just mentioning the French fries, right? The amount of like refining and processing that goes into the French fries, and they make the French fries for like Chick-fil-A, Jack in the Box, like a bunch of different places. They all get their French fries from the same plant in South Idaho.
Chemically, do you know what that does to your body when it enters it?
I have not taken OChem 2 yet. I'm taking that next semester, and that's where they go into a lot of they'll go into more chemicals like that.
Or would that be more of like a biology? Maybe?
Biochemistry would be a lot more of
Biochemistry,
like
yeah.
learning the effects in the body. I'm not going to have to take that.
Yeah. Okay.
But reasonably speaking, a lot of the chemicals that they say are very dangerous are just because they use a what are those? A benzene ring, an aromatic ring.
I don't know what that is.
So basically, the whole concept is that, and there's other dangers to certain chemicals and whatnot, but this is just a blanket danger in a lot of organic chemistry. Is most organic chemistry uses aromatic rings, and certain types, especially ultraviolet radiation, can knock them off of the rest of the molecule, right? So think about it like a building block. Like my analogy is like you got a Lego aircraft carrier here. This Lego aircraft carrier is not a choking hazard on its own. But if you break off a Lego and feed it to a 3-year-old, then it is.
So true.
So this is kind of the idea, is that on its own, the molecule itself is not dangerous, but some form of radiation can knock the aromatic ring off of it. And when it does that, the aromatic ring is cancer-causing, carcinogenic, and just all around horrible because it gets into your DNA and causes cancer. But yeah, this is the kind of the blanket danger in organic chemistry.
Oh gosh! All right. Heck yeah.
For the most part, that doesn't happen because the main type of radiation needed to sever that bond is ultraviolet. So it would need like more like direct sun exposure to do that. But yeah, it's one of the blanket dangers why you shouldn't take medicines that have been sitting out in the sun or whatever, because most of your medicines have aromatic rings in them. Don't store your meds in the sun. It's not a good idea.
Oh, I never even. That's crazy.
And I mean, the danger's not that high, reasonably speaking. I mean, you work with benzene in chem labs and whatever, but just this whole idea of that even if the chemical itself is safe, stuff can happen to it that makes it unsafe later. Just that concept on its own is why everything has a sticker on it that says this chemical is known to the state of California to cause cancer. And that's basically why.
I think you mentioned that there was other options too, other than chemical engineering, for like that you would want to go into, or
Yeah, it's possible. Chemi, you have a lot of different options. A lot of chemis can go into process engineering and like, how do I put it? Like think of assembly lines, coming up with like a process for that.
oh, okay,
It's a lot of chemis will do stuff like that.
because it's still engineering.
I know a
guess.
lot of
Like,
chemis.
That feels more like a mechanical engineering thing, but maybe not.
It is.
Maybe
but
it's like
chemis can steal mechanical engineers' jobs. This is something that can happen.
oh, cool. All right.
Because chemis, the one thing that mechanical engineers have on chemical engineers is mechanical engineers have to do more coding and more like 3-dimensional software work, right? Whereas chemis get most we may not have to take mechanics and materials, but we get a lot of that information elsewhere from just scattered from our different classes. And so we ultimately end up being able to do a lot of what mechanical engineers can do, with the exception of the design process.
Yeah. Okay.
So the specific part design process, chemies are more into the broader picture design, right? So the chemie will design like the boiler system and all the pipes and where they go, and like the on and off valves and all that. And then the mechanical engineer will figure out how to actually make all the pieces, any niche parts that need to be made, anything that can't directly be bought from suppliers. And then you put it all together, basically. Yeah. So engineers usually work in teams for that reason, because one engineering discipline will fill in the gaps from the others. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because chemie is the final senior research division. They make teams, and chemie is the only one that has its own unique teams that doesn't play along with the rest of the engineering. So like mechanical engineers, senior design projects, they'll have a mechanical engineer, an electrical engineer, a civil engineer, and they'll all work together on a project. Well, maybe not civil, but like the mechanical, electrical, and some of the other like niche will all work together on a single project. Yeah. But chemies will only work with chemies on their senior project, which I find kind of interesting, because your senior project is almost always just designing some kind of refinement system.
Does that get used, or is that just
some of them
design something that's been already
it depends.
Done before?
If you do one, so when I went to the engineering expo, I saw there were at least 4 different groups that made senior projects last year. Now 2 of them made them on behalf of companies. So like a company gave them a budget and gave them a project, and it's like, we have this problem, see if you can solve it. And like I remember this one group in particular I saw, it was like a plant where they were getting tons of like, it was like calcium sulfate or like something like that was as a byproduct from their mining operation. And they're like, we don't know what to do with this. We're paying $100,000 a year to get it thrown out, basically, to get rid of this product. Whoa. If you can find a way to make this into a profitable byproduct that we can sell off, that was the whole project. So they figured out a way how to make it into sulfuric acid, which can then be, it doesn't fully like profit necessarily the system,
but it neutralizes the loss.
It pays for itself, basically.
Wow, that's cool.
So that was like one of the projects. Another one that we saw was like trying to refine waste gas, and that one basically found that there's no way you can do this. That's just always going to be a problem. So basically the waste gas was, it was like an oil refinery, and they were refining things down. But there was, they were always getting some weird organic chemicals at the bottom that just didn't fit into any of the categories, and they wanted to just get rid of them. And their way of doing it was just to burn them at the end. And they were asking, is there any way we can process these into something useful? And they tried hard. I mean, their chemical diagram scheme was insane, but ultimately they were like, it's not going to be cost effective. Yes, you can make it into all of these other products, but it won't break even.
Yeah, right.
Now, those were the 2 real world projects, and I really want to do more one of those. The other 2 projects were both, I don't want to say more like woke, but they kind of were woke, like woke projects in the sense of like,
please elaborate.
One was like trying to figure out how to turn carbon, like CO2, back into methane. Which
wouldn't you want the other way around?
CO2 back into natural gas. So when you burn your stove, that turns natural gas into CO2, and they're just trying to go backwards, right? Go from CO2 back into natural gas. And it doesn't take a genius to know that that's going to take preposterous amounts of energy to do that. And you're never going to get that anywhere close to efficient. And yes, it can it be done? Yes. Is it intelligent to do that? No. Yeah.
At the very least, it's going to take the exact same amount of energy. You have to put the exact same amount of energy back into the CO2
Yeah.
to turn it back into methane, and by the second law of thermodynamics, which you're incredibly familiar with.
Yeah.
No.
That's what I said. Like, it doesn't take a genius to tell that, like, this is not something that's going to work. And even if it was a 1-to-1 ratio, even if you could make it near perfect, right? No other losses of energy, just the pure energy it would take to work back to the original. It's still, you still have to get that energy from somewhere, right? Where are you getting the energy? And the answer of where you're getting the energy is, even if you manage to turn it from electricity into a perfect 1-to-1 ratio, right? You're burning methane to get that electricity.
Yeah, right.
The logic is circular no matter how you look at it. Unless you're like using like geothermal power to turn it back into the logic doesn't make sense. So yeah, that's and just kind of projects along that vein. I really don't want to get stuck in one of those, but those are really the only two kinds of projects that they offer. It's really either real world project or something that's along those lines. Like they'll probably have some kind of fuel, like biodiesel project. They always have some kind of biodiesel type project.
Do you know how a lot of the chemicals correlate with the atmosphere and the environment?
I mean, yeah, basically everything returns to CO2. It's basically how it works with
Isn't that a good
organic
thing?
chemistry. Yeah. I mean, there are a few things that won't, but most everything, even they say methane is a big it's a big causer of a greenhouse effect. Methane does not last very long in the atmosphere. I mean, the methane is gone almost immediately when it gets to the atmosphere, relatively speaking.
What do you mean, like it disperses so much that it's no longer methane,
Well,
or
no.
like just like leaves
methane
the planet?
under UV light will degrade
Into what?
carbon dioxide and water.
Oh
So
yeah, there you go.
yeah,
That's
so
just plant food.
methane will it degrades, and I'm not sure on the half-life in the atmosphere, but I know it's nowhere close to CO2 or most of your other gases. What I also like that's crazy is that most of the greenhouse effect on Earth comes from water vapor.
Oh,
And like
that makes sense.
water vapor is
think.
like the number one greenhouse gas effect on Earth.
Water doesn't hold temperature very well, though, does it?
Water holds temperature insanely well.
Oh, okay. So I got that the other way around. Cool.
Nice. They call it in chemie, it's C sub P and C sub V are the two energy equations that you use, and they're unique to every material.
Heat capacity, right?
Heat capacity and constant volume and constant pressure are the two.
And
So
there's different heat capacities
for every
single
element.
state, which is infinite for everything.
And so, but in chemie, they have a table of functions that are based on temperature.
Yes.
So based on the temperature, what temperature it's at, how much energy it will store.
Yeah.
And water, but there's always a base term. So like there's a base term that is added at the front that is just like the minimum energy capacity, and then all the later terms in the equation are all multiplied by temperature. That base heat capacity for water is very high. So like regardless of temperature, water basically always holds, and regardless of phase as well, solid, liquid, and gas, it almost always holds a lot of energy.
What about carbon monoxide?
Oh, monoxide or dioxide?
Monoxide.
Monoxide. Okay, monoxide is cursed.
Okay.
If you look at the chemical formula, it is a cursed creation. A triple bonded oxygen is electronegative. It doesn't want to have a positive charge on it. It's triple bonded to carbon, which has a negative. Carbon monoxide is a disgusting chemical, just from a chemistry standpoint. It doesn't want to exist. It wants to burn it, which is why it's such a danger to humans, because basically what it does is it really wants to latch on to something and not be carbon monoxide anymore. It does not want to exist. So what it does is our red blood cells have hemoglobin in them, and hemoglobin has 4 iron molecules in it, and those iron bond to oxygen, and that's how the body transports the oxygen around the body.
Yeah.
They turn into basically rusts and then derusts on command to transport oxygen.
Cool.
What carbon monoxide does is it gets in there and it forms a permabond to the iron that can't be broken, and essentially neutralizes that. And I think maybe it can be broken. I'm not too clear on that. It's been a while since I've studied
But your
this
body
particular
would,
reaction.
or is it just permanently inside of you?
It just, what it does is it essentially renders your red blood cells useless.
And it would
The
just kill the
ones-
red blood cell.
Well, it
You
doesn't kill
pee it
it.
out,
It's
kinda.
still there. It just can't transport oxygen anymore. So that's why even low percentages, right? Carbon dioxide, it chokes you by removing the oxygen.
Yeah.
And same with most other things that would, gases that would choke you out, would choke you by removing the carbon dioxide. But carbon monoxide can choke you even at relatively low percentages, just because it will latch on to your hemoglobins and kill them, basically. Render them useless. Yeah. I come from, both of my parents were doctors. So I've come from a 2-doctor, they met in medical school. So I come from a 2-doctor family. So a lot of my childhood was learning about medicine and medical stuff, and you got to be a doctor. 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 And then as soon as I got to college, I'm like, what if I don't want to be a doctor? I think that was my first original thought that I had. That wasn't directly from my parents. Was what if I don't want to be a doctor? But yeah.
Do you have a dad, bro?
He passed away a couple years ago.
Dang.
But when I was like 12. But he was a doctor as well. Yeah.
That's like when I was first getting to know Marcus, hearing
Yeah.
that whole testimony about him and his relationship with his dad was like, whoa.
I don't
And,
think I've ever heard
you know,
that.
Will, you were probably the first person I ever told that story to.
And
As
I'm
well.
so grateful for it, because
Yeah.
I appreciate Marcus so much more now
Yeah.
that I know like
Yeah.
so much about his job.
Well, because I actually share a lot in common with him, which is kind of what scares me a little bit. So I'll tell you a little bit
Okay.
about him so that I can... He was probably the most brilliant man I have ever met. And that's not much of an exaggeration. He got an MD PhD in 6 years. So what that means is...
It takes like 10, right?
Yeah. So
Whoa.
basically, that means PhDs usually take 4. MDs usually take 4. That means he did them at the same time in 6 years. And he got his PhD. I tried to read his thesis. I got past the cover page and understood nothing. And that was after 2 years of chemical engineering school.
Whoa.
I still understood none of what was in that thesis. His thesis was on like the body's collagen generation system and how the body renews neocollagenesis and how the body renews the collagen in the skin. And he did that at the same time as going to medical school. So
Wild.
he was born Mormon.
Oh, that's a fun one.
And then he decided that he liked alcohol. And then
Oh.
he wasn't a Mormon.
All right. That's one way to do it.
That,
Incredibly based.
well, see, that was sort of the case until he was about like 26 years old. When I believe this was at the end, I'm unclear on why he was in Jamaica. I'm unclear on why he was in Jamaica for this particular one. I have not heard the full story on this. And to be honest, I probably won't hear the full story on this. Either because people don't know and the people who do know don't want to tell it. But somebody offered him drugs when he was in Jamaica and he took them.
Hey, yo.
And as with most drug users, his first reaction was, where can I get more? And being related to him, I can kind of understand why to a certain extent, because I don't have this as bad as he did. But I still kind of have this where when you're fully awake and alert, your mind is just racing constantly. It's running at 1,000 miles an hour. And I remember him doing this in the car when we were driving. He would be driving and he'd be muttering to himself a little bit because that was his brain, like, going on all cylinders just about everything that was happening around him. And so to him, the drugs were a way to calm his mind down so that he could actually relax. Because that's something I can barely do. I find it very difficult to relax. And I'm only half his genetics. He had this way worse than I do, where he couldn't ever relax. He couldn't ever slow down. It was boom, 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 go, go, go at all hours of all times. So to him, and it wasn't just like marijuana. For him, it was like cocaine, heroin kind of deal, because he needed something hard to like calm his mind down and like
Crazy, bro.
chill out to a certain extent. So the thing was, he had so much extra brain power that even his best friends wouldn't believe he was on drugs.
Whoa.
Like, he could hide it so well that nobody believed him.
Just microdosing heroin?
Not microdosing.
All right. Shoot.
No, he would also, you know how they have been talking about the fentanyl epidemic, right? Well, he took it before it was cool because he was a doctor. And fentanyl is essentially medical grade heroin.
Whoa.
So because he was a doctor, he had access to it at a hospital because they give it to patients at the hospital. So swiping a little on the side and giving it to yourself on the weekends is not that difficult in the 1990s when you're in a hospital.
Yeah.
Especially one in a poorly funded hospital in California, right? Doing that is not difficult. So most of my life, he was a good dad when he was present and sober. And as I got older, that was less and less, right?
Yeah.
So like around 2011, 2012, he was clean for about 2 years. And those are the 2 years I really remember him for, was like around that time, 2011, 2012, when we would go out to the park and shoot model rockets. He would teach me about the periodic table. It was just that was a very kind of, probably the best time in my life was like that period.
Yeah.
He took me out to do sporting events. Like, he was like the classic suburban American dad.
Awesome.
And he used like his intelligence and the fact that he made a lot of money in his job. And he used those two things to really hide his drug habit impeccably. Right.
Wild.
Even in the times when he wasn't clean, people could hardly tell. Like, patients couldn't hardly tell. He was a doctor, he's seeing patients. Patients couldn't tell. He said my mom couldn't even tell half the time when he was high, just because of how well he could hide it. He had so much extra brain power that he could be high as a kite and look normal.
Wild.
And so so finally it came to a head. I'm not going to go into all that. Will got kind of the full story, but let's put it this way. 2016, the House of Cards comes crumbling down. That was not a great year. Let's put it that way. And so then my parents were going to get a divorce. And then halfway through the divorce, he just died of an overdose. Because basically what happened was my mom said he does drugs, and he said, no, I don't. And so the court was like, we're going to give you a drug test. And then he stalled on the drug test for a long time. And during that time, he was clean because he knew if he tested positive on a drug test, my mom would get custody of me and my brother.
Yeah.
And he knew that. And he didn't want that because he did love us quite a lot.
Absolutely. Sure.
So he didn't want that to happen. So basically, he was clean for like the 6 months he managed to stall out the drug test. Then he took the drug test and passed. So he passed it, which in retrospect, that could have made it very awkward because that made my mom look very crazy. The fact that she's been accusing him of all this stuff, and then he passes the drug test.
Right.
So, to the eyes of the court, she now looks like a crazy Bible woman.
Right, yeah.
And he looks like the upstanding, respectable doctor, father kind of deal. And so it was, but then that weekend when he passed, me, my mom, and my brother all went, because my brother is a genius as well. He got more of my dad's like hyper brain genius.
I think you got a decent amount of it, bro.
I got a little bit, but my brother got it way worse than I did. As in, he was like, took the SAT at 15 years old and got like a 1270.
Oh.
At 15.
I think I failed the SAT, bro.
He got like a perfect score on the PSAT and got a national merit scholarship.
That's insane.
He was taking physics 212 at like 15 years old, and he got an A in it. So he's just kind of like big brain, kind of all that stuff. Anyway, I forgot where I was going with this, but what was I just talking about right before this?
Your dad. There was court custody. Then.
So he got into the Bible Bee, like the National Bible Bee.
I don't know what that is.
So it's like a Bible memorization contest.
Whoa.
And he made the nationals on that particular year.
Dad's work goes hard, dude.
Well, so this is my brother who made this.
Who
made
okay.
the Bible Bee. So my brother made the Bible Bee that year. He was probably like, I want to say like 9 or something at the time. But
what?
So
that's insane.
That same weekend he had just gotten his drug test after. We went to Texas to go participate in the nationals. And so we were out of town. So kids are out of town. He just passed his drug test. He immediately decided to go on like a bender, basically.
Oh, gosh.
But he had been off of the drugs for so long that his body wasn't used to it.
Oh.
And so he immediately just OD'd.
Dang.
And he was by himself, and there was no one there to help him. So he died. And that whole things of like 6 months of divorce followed by death was just like, when you're 12 years old,
yeah,
that's something different.
Yeah.
That everyone has something. This is what I've learned. Everyone has had some kind of trauma in their life that they're getting through. And that was mine, right? Everyone has it. It's different levels. Some is worse than others. Mine is certainly not the worst that I've heard or seen.
Sure.
But in this, so afterwards, this was just kind of, that whole period of my life was just chaotic. To be honest, I don't even remember a lot of it.
Yeah.
Just what happened immediately afterwards. But I just remember immediately afterwards, I got into, that was the moment where I basically got into like YouTube and the internet and like was after that. Because before that, I really never had access to any of that stuff. Right? Before that, my mom was very strict on tech and technology. And limiting how much we were able to do things and how much we were making sure we spent plenty of time outside and like engaging. During that period is when I got really into like, I almost want to say escapism almost, because I didn't want to deal with like what was going on in my life. So those were times where I would spend like, out of 14 hours out of the day, I'd spend like 3 hours doing homework and then the next like 10 hours just watching YouTube videos because I didn't want to deal with what was going on.
Yeah.
And that was a dark time for the next like year afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
That was around the time I also started going to community college because my mom had to work more, so she couldn't homeschool us. But we were also so far ahead of like public school at the time that she felt that if she just dropped us into even a private school, like a public or private school, that we would just be bored.
Yeah, I knew a lot of Post Falls High School we had a few valedictorians, and they were all just like they were known to just be bored in every class.
And so
They weren't challenged in any way.
yeah, and so that was her big like fear, was basically that we would be bored and fall in with the wrong crowd, which is not an incorrect fear, considering I saw many of my friends from my childhood in that area fall into that. Okay, because you have to consider the area in which we lived. I lived in Dana Point, California, right? Dana Point, California has two demographics and two only: rich, old white people.
Nice.
Illegal immigrants.
Rad.
These are the only two demographics
Great dynamic.
in town. So, and there are some people who are like of Mexican heritage, and I don't want to say there's a lot of, but basically either like illegals or like the children of illegals
Yeah.
who have grown up in the area, or rich white people.
There's a lot of Latinos.
So this creates for a very nasty high school experience in the area, and a lot of drugs, because it's a fertile breeding ground for the cartels among the among your more recent immigrants, and among the poorer areas. There's a lot of cartel influence.
Yeah.
And a lot of drugs flowing in. And then you have the rich white people who can afford to pay for the expensive drugs, which only makes the drug trade so much more profitable in that area. The high school, in the public high school in the area, was called Dana Hills. We called it Dana Pills, because it was filled with drugs. And there was no secret about that.
How does the whole story with your parents reflect on your relationship with Christ? How was it through all of it?
I don't want to. How do I put this? I don't know if it shapes my relationship with Christ as much as it shapes like my goals in life.
Yeah,
If that makes sense. Like, I feel like
that makes a ton of sense.
My relationship with God wasn't super, because my dad was never really the spiritual leader of the house. That was always my mom anyway. And seeing her kind of stand firm in her faith through all of that, really, on the one hand, I felt like the pros and cons of that situation with my relationship in Christ almost canceled each other out. Because the pros were like, I saw my mom stand firm in her faith through all that, but the cons were almost like, I saw who I thought was like a upstanding, God-fearing man just crumble in like 6 months. Because you're getting the cliff notes of this whole story, the amount of drama and backstory and all this stuff. Let's just say drugs are not the reason they were getting a divorce. Like, their divorce had nothing to do with drugs.
Gotcha.
So there were other reasons for that, and there's hours more backstory behind this story.
Yeah.
But
it takes a lot to tear apart a committed couple, you know.
Yeah, and so that was also not the first time he had overdosed. But anyway, the what was I talking about? Oh, relationship with God. What I was gonna say is it shaped more of like my life goals at the time.
Yeah.
Because what I realized was, here's a man who had every success that you could possibly think of, right? He had a wife. He had kids. He had a good job. He made it through medical school. He lived in a nice area, in a nice house. He made a ton of money. He didn't even have to work full time to be able to afford. He only had to work 3 days a week.
Wow.
To be able to like afford to live in a nice place. And that meant he had time with family. Like, this is like dream American dream status for most people. And through like one or two like critical errors, it all came crumbling down. Right? If you think about it, right?
Yeah.
That's kind of shaped like my life goals, right? It's more, I think a lot of what contributed to it was the stress of going to medical school, and like the stress of the amount of like pressure he put on himself really contributed. which is one of the reasons I've tried to put one of the reasons I chose engineering is I'm trying to not be him. I'm trying to do something different. Choose engineering. I'm trying to put less stress on myself and he had the time to spend with family and then he didn't.
Yeah.
That is kind of, because basically he had all this extra time and instead of spending it with his family, he had these crazy business ideas that were supposed to make him a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, dude, and this is me retrospect talking back to him in the past.
Yeah.
It's like, dude, you make it close to, like, if you worked full time, you would make close to $1 million a year at your job that you have, right? That is insane. You don't need more money. Spend time with your family, you moron.
Yeah, right.
Like, you have the time.
Mm-hmm.
And so but that same statement, I'm wrapping that back around on myself. Like, I want to be able, like, my goals in life have always been more to, like, have a family and spend time with them, right?
Yeah.
Job, career, all that stuff, it's all secondary. It's all, like, it's a means to an end rather than the end goal.
It's a vehicle to your goal, not the goal itself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so the goal is to be the dad that I remember he was in those, like, few good years, right? Like, that is the goal.
I relate to that a lot. My parents divorced when I was 12 also.
Mm-hmm.
My father, growing up, it's like I always feared him to a degree. Whenever he came home, didn't like it. It's like I can go into that if you really want, but it's just ultimately, he really has shaped my goals for what it means for me to grow up and kind of how do I want to live my life? How do I want to be a man in a relationship, and how do I want to be a father to my potential future children? It's definitely shaped my ideas of how I don't want to be, and has given me direction on kind of what do I need to learn to be the man that he wasn't, if that makes sense.
One other thing I want to add to that was he was never really a spiritual leader of the household, right? And that is something that I would fully want to be.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Oh, man. What do you think about that, biblically speaking?
I think it's very biblical to be, like, a spiritual leader of a household.
Do you think it matters between whether it be the man or the woman?
I think it matters based on, like, the gender of the children, right? Like, I never had an example of, like, a good, like, Bible-fearing father, right? Like, he believed in the Bible, but he was always influenced by his, like, by the Mormonism he grew up in and the atheism he had in college and, like, a more hedonistic kind of mindset / worldview. And so he was never really any kind of a spiritual leader or, like, an example to be followed, if that makes sense.
It does.
So there's no real godly example of what a Christian man should be.
Yeah.
And I think my mom was great. I love my mom to death. But as I got older and into my teenage years, I found it very difficult to, like, how do I put it? Like, respect her opinions when I had opinions of my own, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like when my dad said something, it was always like I respected it, like the way it was said, and didn't really push back. Whereas when my mom said something, I always pushed back against it a little bit and argued with her.
Yeah.
Like, there wasn't the same level of respect there. And that's
if that's even the right word.
It's I mean, that's not even the right word, I don't think.
I know what
like,
you're saying. I do know.
But it's like, how do I put it? Like, when my dad said something, it was, like, treated as fact. Whether it was when my mom said something, I would push. There was more questioning, more pushback against it.
Yeah, I think that gets into the roles of men and women, and that is
Biblical gender roles and all that.
yeah, which I don't know what you subscribe to with that. Like, there's the idea that I've been talking about a lot with the Chi Alpha people, where it's like egalitarian versus complementarian. Do you know the differences between those two?
I'm familiar, and I'm not wanting to get into this subject too much, like
Okay.
too deep into this particular one, mainly because I think it matters more on like a case by case basis more than anything else.
Yeah.
I think it's more, as we've been talking about recently, spirit of the law in that sense, where in my family, my dad was not in a position. He did not have the biblical knowledge or the faith basis to be the spiritual leader of the household. So my mom had to step up and do it. Right. In a household where there is a father who has the faith and knowledge basis to be the spiritual leader, I do think it should be the father, but does it 100% need to be? And I think there's jobs for both sides as well. Like, I feel like my mom is different because she's a doctor, right? She's very, like, the same way I am, like, very, how do I put it? Logic and fact oriented more than most women I'm discovering. Like, her mind was always very fact conclusion, kind of like the Bible study I was talking to you about earlier, where it's not very focused on the emotional aspect of Christianity and very focused on the intellectual aspect. She was always very much like that, which is good, but I feel like you need the pairing, because I feel like and I've been noticing this from hearing women preach in Chi Alpha, is basically the women can bring a more emotional understanding of the passage to the table more than I certainly ever could. Right? So, like, I'm working on having the more emotional, relational aspect of my faith, but I certainly won't ever be to the point where I can teach other people about the emotional, relational aspect of faith. Right? I don't ever feel like I will be qualified to do that, just because of how much I've struggled in that sense.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Let me I want to talk about my parents then.
I do want to hear about your parents for sure.
Well, I mean, at least in this regards, where it's like the egalitarian or complementarian kind of thing, or the roles, if you will. It's kind of like the way I've always seen it. You said something where your mom had to step up because your father wasn't, which is exactly what my mom did. What's the cool thing about women is that they are fully capable and they are extremely strong in that sense, and they are able to lead, and they will when need to. Yeah. But the idea, at least in my idea of trying to learn what a man is, this could change. You know, I'm not like fully subscribed to anything necessarily, but the idea is that in order to lead, it's basically trying to take that burden off of your woman, if that makes sense. Of leadership, which is definitely a burden. So it's just kind of, for me specifically, which again is definitely like a case to case kind of thing. But my mom was forced into, raising two boys on her own, and she had to be the father and the mother,
Yeah. No, that was very much how my mom was as well.
Yeah, exactly. And just for me personally, it's definitely a goal of mine to not have that happen for my wife. It's I want to be that man that she can rely on, kind of thing. Yeah,
for sure.
That would definitely be really cool.
Yeah, just be more of a spiritual leader in that sense, because I feel like when words are spoken by like a man, I can tell is like a male household leader who's like a male biblical leader. How do I put this? It feels like, to me anyway, maybe this is because of how it is. It hits me a little differently, right? Like whenever I've been chewed out by like an old lady at my Bible study or whatever, from the old lady Bible study, it never really hit me that hard. Yeah. But when like a guy at my church was like, there was this guy who I really he's a really great guy at the church I grew up going to.
You look up to him.
His name's John. He's a airline pilot, basically.
Oh, cool.
And this guy is a very soft-spoken, kind of calm demeanored guy. But when he says something, it carries a lot of weight, either scripturally or relationally. Like, he's just I think he's got to be in his late 50s by now. And just kind of, it's the quietness paired together with like the wisdom and just knowing that he spent many years of his life studying and being a spiritual leader of his family. And he's had multiple kids, and they've all grown up. And they're all grown up in the church, and they're all still a part of the church, and they're all still like working with the church, right?
Yeah.
That kind of success just lends a lot of weight and credibility to his words. And I felt that when I was talking to him.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is like, in my eyes, like a good godly goal to aspire to, is like be that guy who is raised his family well, who studied and led them spiritually to the point where when you say something to a kid at your church, they feel the weight of what you said. Not that you're being important, and like, not that it's an important role to do, but just like the I don't know how to explain it. Like the just having that level of credibility behind your words.
Yeah, you walk your talk.
Yeah.
You're not a hypocrite.
Yeah.
Yeah, you are trustworthy.
Yeah.
Then. So, and you have a life to show for it. You know, if you're walking around, people respect you. It's kind of it's a fruit. It's a fruit of walking by
for sure.
the Spirit, I would say.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's good stuff, dude.
Mm-hmm, for sure. You were going to tell us about your family a little bit, I think.
Well, I said what I wanted to say, but I can go into
maybe just a short...
So, okay.
Idea,
sure.
General idea.
I don't know if you've heard my testimony or not.
I've heard part of it in Vietnam and like in a couple different places.
Yeah, okay.
But
a little sporadically around.
Yeah, just like maybe just a general overview of
All right. Okay, so growing up, my dad was a pastor.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, here, let me get into my mindset here. I got to go way back. So first of all, my parents met each other at college. They had fun. They made some kids, and I popped out 2002. Then 12 years later, my parents had a divorce. So from when I was 0 and 12, my dad was a pastor. So I was a pastor's baby, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I was raised up Christian and everything like that, except my father was he had narcissistic and manipulative tendencies.
Mm-hmm.
I just want to preface this. I always like to preface this that I love my father. He is forgiven. I've been trying to honor him and rebuild a relationship with him since my coming to faith about a year ago. So just, this is not throwing shade at him. I make mistakes just as he does. In fact, in a later relationship with a woman, I fell into the same mistakes. So just prefacing that. Anyways, but that brought a lot of abuse, especially mentally, on my mother. And of course, then the whole family. So I had quite the broken family growing up, even though it was under this image of, like, every time we'd go to church, we had to appear as the perfect little church family, mom, dad, 5 kids, and 2 dogs, the perfect American dream, if you will. What a godly man and family. So basically, growing up, he was my example of Christ because he did lead the family spiritually, but he led it in a manner of hypocrisy. And so I associated Christ with that. I said earlier how when my dad would come home, I would feel fear, not because he was big and scary, but because it was like the end of my free time, if that makes sense. There was no respect for my individuality, if that makes sense. It's kind of like, I guess I can go into that. It's kind of every single time he would come home, it would be, all right, we're going to go do this. We're going to be home by this time. And then we'd end up getting home by 3 a.m. And the entire time we were out, our mom would be trying to get a hold of him. And as we were doing that, he'd be saying, yeah, we're on our way home as we're driving another hour into Montana. It's like, anytime he came home, it was kind of the end of my freedom for the next while, and I hated it. But so it's kind of like he claimed to represent Christ. I was afraid of him, didn't like him, therefore I didn't really care for Christ, right? Divorce happened when I was 12. There wasn't a court battle or anything. My mom had custody without a fight, and which I do respect my dad for. I like how he handled the divorce. I don't like that he got a divorce, but I do like how he kind of handled it, even if a lot of it probably stemmed from pride. Because it allowed for my brother and I to stay with my mom without too much drama or hassle, you know.
Yeah.
So then for the next many years after I was 12, I never shut the door completely on Christianity, although I walked around saying I believed in Christ. I walked around saying I was a Christian, all because of my mom, because through all of that, like you were saying with your mom, my mom was really strong in her faith. I respected her faith a lot. She really expressed and showed the love that God is offering. And I latched onto that for sure, because it directly contradicted the love that I was getting from my father, which they both claimed to represent Christ. So it was just really confusing, you know. My two older brothers, they are 9 and 8 years older than me, right?
Yeah.
So they were young men by the time the divorce happened. I was 12, so they would have been
like 20, 21.
Yeah, 20, 21, or 20 and 19, something like that. And so by that point, they were, moving out kind of thing. They actually moved out right before the divorce because they were trying to get away from him. So they then, understanding at that point as young men, as I have found out now that I'm like 21 and kind of been going through those years of I'm trying to figure out what it means to be a man. It's like, well, how do I want to be in this world?
Right at that same time, they were watching that whole catastrophe unfold.
Yeah, right. The same time they were learning that the man that they grew up with as their example is not a man to be exampled. It's like it kind of all of a sudden they had to reprogram themselves. They went through an extensive process of trying to learn how to not only treat women, but how just to function as a man, because what we grew up following was dysfunction. So they kind of had a clean slate and went through multiple different they experimented with each other, like as they not like with like they weren't poking and prodding, but rather trying out different ideologies, religions, and they tampered with drugs a lot too, just trying to open up their mind, experiment with things, especially and question everything, especially authority. If somebody, for us, what they were what they were trying to teach Jeremiah and I, because they took up that father role, Jeremiah and I looked up to them greatly because they were walking their talk, unlike our father was, right? As they went through all of these experiments and shifts in their mindsets and ideologies, and what they thought was right turned out to be wrong, kind of thing. They would kind of, every now and then we'd sit down, we'd all hang out, and we'd be updating each other on what has worked, what hasn't, why hasn't it, and trying to figure out where it all kind of comes from, right? Eventually they kind of landed on just questioning authority in the sense of growing up, we weren't allowed to question things, especially the Bible, because our dad was a pastor and he wouldn't let us challenge it, if that makes sense. So it's kind of at least I never felt like I could. I never felt comfortable enough to question it because I felt like that would get me in trouble. So the same way then, they began to question everything. They were way further off from Christianity at that point. It was dead to them just along as our father was at the time. But for Jeremiah and I, we were still under the influence of our mother and them. So we were getting these two different perspectives of them trying to find worldly wisdom, if you will, and that they were relaying to Jeremiah and I, my twin brother and I, for the audience, along with my mother, who has godly wisdom, if you will. And I was trying to navigate that world in that confusing situation, kind of two contradicting things in some ways. In some ways they kind of aligned. But eventually then, July 24th, 2023, I think. Maybe 2022, actually. It would have been 2023.
That was this past couple
Yeah,
13.
it would have been the summer of 2023, July 24th. Because of along with all my brothers, we kind of, through our questioning stuff, we all got super deep into conspiracy theories. We all love them.
Mm-hmm.
For me specifically,
Yeah.
This is just like my testimony at this point. Hi Kip, you heading out, dude? Good stuff.
One thing I will say is I remembered this story from Vietnam as soon as you started talking. But,
Okay, yeah, cool.
But the what I was gonna say is when you mentioned that like when your dad got home was kind of the end of your like free time kind of.
Yeah.
That is very much exactly how I felt whenever my mom would get home. Because my mom was kind of like, and I don't want to talk bad about her. I love my mom to death.
Absolutely.
But the kind of just the way how she approached things was very much like I almost want to say too God.
Make noise, Kip, you're fine.
I almost want to say, and this sounds bad, but like too godly almost.
Yeah.
In a way of like almost
legalism
or like almost self-righteous levels.
Yeah. Okay. That's a good way to put it.
Sometimes. And so, we weren't allowed to watch any kind of like fantasy movies growing up. So Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings, those were out of the question.
My dad didn't like any of it.
The video games were out of the question.
Jeremiah and I brought home Pokemon cards and he threw them all away because he said that they were demons.
Yeah, no, I brought home a board game once. My mom did the exact same thing.
Yeah.
And she threw it away.
Yeah.
She said it looked creepy or it had demons as a playable character in it or just kind of stuff like that.
It wasn't just like end of my free time. It was the end of my comfort.
Yeah. I was an extrovert until that whole thing went down. And then after that, I lost a lot of my friends around that period because it was like a year and a half where I was just such chaos that I never had time to schedule things. I was either rocking back and forth or planning something or you can come through here.
Oh, yeah. You want to say hi to the camera, bro? All right, that works. I'm coughing.
But...
Oh, sorry. That's my bad, dude. Hi, Kip.
Bye.
Peace out.
So the what was I just saying? So like she wasn't like she didn't kind of understand almost that like my introverted like the introvertedness that had come out during that period.
Yeah.
Meant that I really wasn't one to like set up or organize my own like events. Like you really shouldn't expect a 12-year-old to like 100% set up all their own events and things to go to. It's like as far as like social activities go and all that stuff, right? Like the parent probably needs to do a little bit. So she really didn't do anything. And so I ended up being more of like a shut-in. I really didn't do much outside. I didn't have a ton of friends.
Yeah.
I had one friend who was a neighbor who I would hang out with from time to time, but that was like once a week probably. Aside from that, it was mostly just me. And as soon as I'd finished my homework, I'd go on the internet. And that was my whole life. But as soon as she got home, or I would play video games, which was a big no-no in the house. But since she was at work, she couldn't really stop me.
Yeah.
So,
my man's a rebel.
But her coming home basically always meant ending anything that was fun. Because at that point, my homework was done. But I also really couldn't just sit there and watch YouTube videos or play video games.
Yeah.
Or be with friends. And so, like, when she would get home, I basically wouldn't ever know what to do. Mm-hmm. So that was... Yeah, it was just kind of an interesting parallel that we had there.
Yeah, for me, it was always confusing growing up because my mom didn't care about that stuff, but my dad did. So it would be like one thing I've taken from that is, as a parent, you kind of want to be a unified front in that manner, because as a kid, it's so contradicting, or I feel like it builds distrust between the parents, if that makes sense, especially where it's like, I would go to my mom for some stuff and I'd go for my dad for the other stuff, and I would hope that they wouldn't talk to each other, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I would do the same thing.
Yeah,
when I was
where
little.
my dad would be like, "What are you doing?" And then I'd be like, "Mom told me I can," And then
my classic story of this was, I'd go ask my mom, "Can I have a candy?" She said, "Sure, you can have one." And then I would go to my dad, "Can I have a candy?" "Sure, I can have one." I got 2 candies.
Oh, that's a great way of doing it. Yeah,
it's an awesome. There's no flaws in the strategy whatsoever.
The way to go for me was asking my grandma if I could for the holidays or something.
Okay.
What, to have a candy?
My mom and dad were both bringing down the hammer. I mean, more
Grandma.
like sneaking video games, sneaking.
Oh yeah.
I was a bit.
Hey, Grandma,
I would
can I play some video games?
maximize how much video games I could sneak. If you don't mind, I have we used to have like a ball system where you had like 14 rubber balls a week or a day to use, and each ball was like 30 minutes of video games. And I would use a ball and then set a timer for like 40 minutes, and then take the ball out and drop it back in so it looked like I was putting in another ball, and then set another timer for 40 minutes.
Oh yeah.
Stuff like that.
See, I still don't think my mom knows how much video games I played when she was out. Like, I think she knows I played some, but like in her mind, I don't think she ever really fully understood to what extent, like how fast I could really get my homework done in order to like spend a good chunk of the day. Like in one
That's a great motivator.
in like 6 months, I racked up because at the time I didn't have a computer or a PC. I just had my tablet, which made playing video games difficult. So I played Minecraft Pocket Edition, and I racked up like 600 hours in 6 months. In
Back
Minecraft
then too,
Pocket
there was
Edition.
no content in that.
No, there was enough content. This was right around the same time that like the 1.16 update came out, like the Nether update.
Oh, okay, yeah. So they would have.
So
it would have been more.
I'm talking about later teens at this point. So I'm
Okay,
talking
yeah.
about like 15, 16 years old.
Yeah, for sure.
By this point. Yeah. I lost my train of thought again.
You're good.
Oh, you mentioned your grandma, Jeremy, in the back. What's really funny is I don't think a lot of people, because you can't see this from my looks, but I'm like a quarter Hispanic. So my grandmother on my mom's side, my mom's mom, is from Ecuador.
Oh.
And she has if anyone else watching has a Hispanic grandmother, you know the full Hispanic grandmother package, and she had the full Hispanic grandmother package. So do you know what that is?
What are you insinuating right now?
The Hispanic grandmother package is a universal experience.
Okay.
As I've discovered after being on the internet.
I have 2 white grandmas. Please explain.
I have 1 white grandma, and the 2 cannot be more different. So my white grandma is like, "Oh, that's so sweet. How are you? How have you been? You look so good. You want to go out to lunch?" And here, let me pay for your lunch. Let me make you some cookies. Like
Sounds like my grandma's. Yeah.
This is.
One of my grandmas.
That's like my white grandma, and I love her. She's basically
That's my white grandma. Yeah.
She's basically my last like fully surviving grandparent at this point. Is that grandma, and I love her to death. She's Mormon, but I love her to death anyway.
I still have 3 kicking around.
I call her. Grandma's my white grandma, and Grammy is my Hispanic grandmother.
Yeah, heck yeah.
So,
That's your dad's mom, right?
yeah, and so she's let me reconstruct my thought. So
You're good,
my
yeah.
Hispanic grandmother, you would come over, and she would look you, and she'd make a remark like, "What are you feeding him? It looks like he gained weight." And that's what she'd turn to my mom and immediately say that to her.
Crazy, dude. Then be fighting words.
And then my mom's like, "Don't say that to a little kid." And she's like, "But it's true." and then
Oh,
she'd
dang.
walk away.
Sheesh.
She had a cat.
No
and
chill, dude. Based grandma.
Okay. She had no filter and no chill.
That's so rad.
And if she got really pissed, there's a funny story of one time my uncle really pissed her off.
Mm-hmm.
And my reminder, my uncle's like 300 pounds and like 5'11", like a bulky dude, and she's like 5'1" and like maybe 100 pounds on a good day. And the story goes that she beat him to a pulp if he pissed her off.
Crazy.
Like when they were younger. When my so that's yeah, no, she but if you think about it, her life was very difficult because she moved to America at like 20.
Oh,
when she
yeah.
got married to my grandpa, she moved to America at like 20 in like the 1960s. And then they had 2 kids, and then he promptly died after they had 2 kids when kids were like 6 and 7 years old.
Ooh.
And she was a stay-at-home mom with no job and no American education, who could barely speak English and had only gotten her driver's license like a month before.
That's wild.
And so then she's just stuck in America. And she has the house that he had built, and that's it. That's all she has, and an old car. And she managed to pull together to the point where they were never like destitute their entire childhood. They always had some amount of money.
What a woman, dude.
Because she started her own small business. At one point, she owned like a leaded glass making place. She made like leaded glass windows.
Whoa.
And then as soon as she worked for the Department of Social Security as well in California for a long time.
Cool.
To the point where she actually got so high up that she lived in Los Angeles, and they would fly her out to Sacramento during the week and then fly her back home for the weekends. Like the government paid for that. Like she was like high up in the Social Security Administration of the state of California.
That's insane, dude.
Yeah, and she
Your
did
family's crazy.
She did that all on her own. Like she ended up, while she was taking care of 2 small kids right after her husband just died, she went back to school and got a business degree.
Crazy, dude.
Yeah, no, she's an insane woman, but she has no filter. That's what I remember. That's what I remember about her. Is basically, as a kid, we would go walking on the beach. She loved to go walking on the beach, right? And we would walk by someone who was a little bit chunky, and she would lean over to me and go, that guy must like McDonald's. And I'm like, Grammy, don't say that out loud. She'd say it loud, too.
Yeah, good stuff. Yeah,
And
she wants them to hear it.
Oh, yeah. Fully intending the person to hear it. And if the person takes issue, she will punch him. I mean, I don't understand. But just the difference between the two is... Oh, yeah. She loved being the problem. And she was very... So... after my dad was gone, my mom still had to work, but we were like 12 years old. She didn't want to leave us home alone at the time. So, whenever she was at work, we would go to Grammy's house because Grammy lived like 5 minutes away from our house. So she would also just randomly appear at our house sometimes, which is kind of funny.
Cool.
Because she was retired and she didn't live that far away. And she loved me and my brother.
Oh,
I mean,
sure.
We were the light of her life. We were her second set of children. And so
Right. Yeah.
there was probably about a 3 or 4 year period in there where we would spend 2 full days a week just at her house.
That's cool.
So we got to know her pretty well. And she had a lot of fun stories of different things that she did. Her life was crazier than mine. But yeah, I just want to talk about her for a minute because I feel really bad. She has dementia now. She can't remember anything. But her personality was always very tough. And she was as smooth as sandpaper. That's the way how we put it. She would polish other people, but she was... Yeah. You would hear the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Good, dude.
At
It's kind of
all
refreshing,
times.
honestly.
Yeah. What else about her? Yeah, she was not a cook. Like everyone.
Really?
No, she was not a cook. All of her other siblings are all great cooks. She's not a cook. She didn't cook. She didn't really. She was the first and only woman in her family to be like a working woman.
Mm.
So basically, in Ecuador, she blackmailed her father into getting her an education, right? All of her other, she's one of five, and with two brothers, two sisters, and neither of her two sisters got an education past sixth grade.
Yeah.
Because this is 1950s, third world. If you're a woman, you don't get an education above sixth grade. But she went to her father and she said, I know about your side chick.
Whoa.
If you will buy me a typewriter and a bus ticket to the university in the big city from the village, or I will tell mom. And guess what she got? A typewriter and a bus ticket to the big city with her education fully funded all the way through college.
Insane, dude.
She played the game, the long game. So by the time she gets
She
out of
played it
college,
well, clearly.
in their culture at the time, as a woman, you were married by 16 years old.
Mm.
If you were not married by the time you turned 20, you were never going to get married. Because men did not marry women who were older than 20. That was just how it worked in that time, in that place. And so by the time she gets done with college, she became a high school teacher in her village. And she gets to be like 25 years old, and she's not married. And everyone's like, she's an old maid. Don't bother with her.
Yeah.
And so she had other plans. She started hanging out by the U.S. military base.
I remember you telling me this story now.
The U.S. military base. And she found like a 35-year-old Korean War veteran.
Oh.
Who was hanging out at the U.S. military base. And she fully was like, well, there's my... She really wanted to go to the U.S. It may have started as a more like passport situation,
Mm-hmm.
but that's not what it became, because she ended up like worshiping him basically.
There needs to be a movie about this woman, dude.
No, so she ended up worshiping him to the point where when he died, she went into depression for nearly 20 years. And she has dementia and she still needs antidepressants.
Dang.
From this event. Like, she's been on antidepressants her whole life. She never had a problem with it before. It was right after he died. Something inside of her broke from that because she loved him so much. But, yeah, I just wanted to talk about her because she's one of the cooler people I know.
Cool, dude.
And she's from a different time, right? Like, it's cool
Yeah,
to, like,
absolutely.
think about other times.
Yeah. Yeah. History's rich, bro.
Yeah.
And 35-year-old Korean War veteran right now seems like crazy.
Yeah,
They're all-
yeah.
They're all old.
They're all very old, yeah. But he was, I think he was an aircraft mechanic, if I'm not mistaken, in the Korean. I don't think he saw very much frontline combat, but he fixed the airplanes at all the bases during the Korean War. Air Force. He was, no, funny story about him though. He really wanted to get into World War II really badly, but he was too young, so he faked an ID that said he was 16 when he was like 14 to get into basic training. And he ended up in Berlin in August of 1945.
Whoa.
And then he ended up in Okinawa in like December of 1945. So he missed the war by like 3 months.
Insane.
And he wanted to be there so bad. He turned 16 in Okinawa as like part of the U.S. military because that's how badly he wanted to be in World War II.
Wow.
Yeah.
This has
Oh,
been
and that's not even the craziest grandparent I have.
okay. This has been fun, bro.
Yeah.
We gotta call it, man.
We gotta call it. It's 3 right now.
Yeah. Don't you gotta go by 3:30?
Well, I have to like leave by 3:30. But yeah. I want to give you a quick rundown though of my coolest grandparent, like 2 minutes.
You know what?
He was CIA in Vietnam.
Whoa.
Yeah.
That's-
So he
Did I know that when we went to Vietnam?
I told you about it in Vietnam, although I might have told you that, but he there's a movie with Robert Downey Jr. called Air America, and it's his favorite movie because he considers it to be like a glamorized version of his own life.
Whoa, dude.
Because he was like a smoke jumper before that, which was like the guys who, like, you know how there's like parts of like Montana that are like there aren't even any roads that go out there. They're like just the middle of the forest. And then there were fires out there. And the question is, how do you stop those fires from burning down the whole forest if you can't get cars out there? And the answer is you jump out of an airplane in a parachute into the path of the fire, and then you cut a hole in the trees as like a fire break. And that was his job before he went into and the CIA recruited from the smoke jumping academy because they said, if you're crazy enough to jump out of an airplane to fight fires, you're probably crazy enough to go into Laos for the CIA in the Vietnam War. And they were right.
Bros, what? Bro. Your lineage is insane, dude.
Crazy people, but they look, and I guarantee you other people have family with crazy story because on the surface, they all look so normal.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you would never know that any of these people did anything crazy. But, like...
That's so cool.
When you dig down to, like, their story. Mm-hmm. So, yeah. That's cool. Yeah, we should probably wrap it up here. But, yeah.
All right.
I didn't even get to tell any of my own personal fun stories.
Next time, dude. I'll have you back on.
To have you back on.
Yeah, that's too bad. We'll have to have you back on.
Next year.
This was Sir Marcus Crawford, everybody. I said that right.
Kofford.
Kofford? Yes. That's my bad.
I think it's because you heard me mispronounce it.
Is that what it was? Because you said Crawford earlier.
I totally just got Mandela just now. Like, been adding an R there for the longest time.
Kofford? Yeah. My apologies. Did I say it right that time?
Still not right, but you're close enough.
Here, you say your name.
Way closer the second time.
Say your name then.
Kofford.
Kofford.
Like
Marcus Kofford.
Oh.
Thank you for coming on, bro.
Yes.
This is a huge
favor. This was a lot of fun.
I had fun too. I would love to have you back on.
Yeah.
Any final remarks?
Final remarks? Go to Life Group.
Amen to that, dude. All right. Cut.
What's up, guys?
Subscribe.
Yes.
Thanks for watching that episode. I hope you really enjoyed. I know we had a fun time making it. Please, if you really want to support us on Patreon, you will be getting the episodes a week ahead of time. So it's definitely worthwhile, or not. Just support us, just support us, please.
We need money. You guys can find us on all the podcast platforms, hopefully, by this point.
You will.
You will.
You will.
So Spotify, Apple.
All of them.
You know, I guess YouTube, but not really, you know.
And YouTube.
So find us there. Enjoy it. And if you don't, I will find you.
He found me.
Yeah. Amen. All right.
I think that's kind of it.
Shit. Okay.
All right. Off to Denny's.
That's a damn good. Yeah.